Thank you, Christopher, for the warm welcome. Are we good on microphone? Great. So thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you to Dr. Brian Pedraza for the invitation. And thanks to everyone. I've only been here for about 4 hours. I just flew in from Chicago this morning, and it has been nothing but a warm welcome. So thanks to everyone. I've been able, a literally warm welcome. A little warmer here than it is in Chicago. So it seems like you've got a really great community here, and I really appreciate your inviting me to be a part of it this evening and tomorrow morning. Here's what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be giving you this talk on humanizing artificial intelligence. We're going to be looking at what artificial intelligence is, some distinctive ethical issues it poses generally, but also specifically for the areas of healthcare ethics. And then we're going to be looking eventually to some ways I think that the Catholic intellectual tradition can provide guidance for thinking through some of these problems that it raises. So that's where we're heading this evening. Before we do that, I want to just give you a brief introduction to artificial intelligence. So this might be review to some of you, but for those of you who it isn't review for, I think it'll be helpful to see it in action just a little bit. One thing I should say is that all of the images I'm using tonight, I had to do this, were made by artificial intelligence. So any image you see up here is an image that was created ahead of this presentation by an artificial intelligence algorithm. The first thing to note is that a lot of people have been talking about artificial intelligence for the last year or so. Right? It really kind of exploded like December, January of last year. That's kind of when we started seeing headlines all over the place. It's not brand new though. It's been with us for quite a while. Right? So anyone ever used Gmail or Outlook or just text autocomplete in the last 5 years and you see something like this going on, right? You start texting, hey, Evan and Malika. Haven't, seen you in a while. That is what I wanted to say. Press tab and it fills it in. That's artificial intelligence. It's not at the level of something like ChatGPT and some of these other things that have been making headlines, but artificial intelligence has been around for a while. It just has been more subtle and in ways that maybe haven't been as in your face as it has been in the last year. Same thing with YouTube, Amazon, right? When you log into YouTube, if you're logged in, it will show you videos and you look at them and you think, oh, I am kind of interested in that video. I think I'll click it. And then you look at the person sitting next to you and they log into YouTube. It's a very different set of videos. Same with Amazon, right? You log into Amazon, and if you buy a lot of books, like I do, Amazon figures out what books you like, and it will say, here's a new book that's coming out, maybe you'll like that. That's also artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, we'll be talking more today about kind of the flashy artificial intelligence, but I think it's really important to note that artificial intelligence has been something that's been here for a while, just in more subtle ways. This is, of course, the platform that everyone's been talking about, so ChatGPT. How many of you have some familiarity with ChatGPT, just by show of hands? Okay, so most folks. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to be mostly lecturing this evening, but I love teaching, and I would not feel good about myself as a teacher if I didn't have you do something and interact just a little bit. So what I want you to do is to, if you have a phone with you, if you don't, that's totally fine. If you have a phone with you, all this does is bring you to ChatGPT. If you've never been there before, you'll have to log in. If you don't feel good about it, you just use your Gmail account. So if you don't have a Gmail account, don't worry. That's okay too. As long as we get a couple people who can log in, that'll be fine. So it should just bring you to the website. You have to click log in, and you should be able to log in with Google. And as long as you have a Gmail account, can I see a show of hands? How many of you have got, if you've ever logged in before, it should just take you right to there too. Okay, so a few people getting in. Okay. What I want you to do now is, we only need a few people to get in. If we can just have the people who are able to access, just raise your hands again. Okay, so look around you at the people whose hands are raised and find one of them. I'll go and see if there's a couple people that still need to log in. And what I want you to do is to just give it a try, just so everyone can see this in action, so that when we start talking about this, you know what we're talking about and have seen what it can do. These are just some suggestions to you of things you might want to prompt it to do. Maybe grandma just sent you $50 for birthday, and I heard it's midterms week around here, so thank you especially to the students for turning up in the middle of midterms week, and you think, just don't have time to write grandma the thank you note, but I really need to write grandma the thank you note. Ask ChatGPT to write grandma a thank you note, see how it does. That's one prompt. Any professors in the room? a few. Maybe you could have it try and write a recommendation letter for you. This is something that professors do a lot, is we write lots of recommendation letters. See, by the way, this is not an endorsement of doing any of these things in actual practice. Just want you to see how it does. You can ask it to write a poem or song. You can ask it advice on a problem. You could ask it to come up with catchy titles for the podcast that you're planning, because all of us and some guys are planning a podcast. So what I want you to do now is, again, try and find somebody who's been able to log on. And I will just do it too, in case you don't have somebody sitting next to you who's able to do it. And do this right now. I'm just going to give you like 3 minutes. Find somebody again who's logged on next to you and try and prompt it with something. It doesn't have to be one of these things. It could be something else as well. So just take like 2 or 3 minutes. And then most of the rest of this, I'll be talking through things with you. But this will be a little interactive part of the presentation. Any of you all able to log in?
Yeah.
Okay, good. What's the prompt you're going to give it?
I don't know.
Have you played around with it before yet?
No.
Okay.
This is my first time ever using it.
The songs are pretty funny.
Like they can make their own song.
Yeah, they're super cheesy.
Yeah.
But like
make you a song. Yeah. Like,
it'll definitely write. You can say like write a song about midterms week.
No, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm about to be on this thing, making up random.
Oh no.
It's actually kind of funny.
Yeah, it'll do recipes. It'll give you advice that's like variable, but.
Yeah, let's see my song. In the classroom, tensions rise and high.
Mine's in the library books.
All right, just take another minute or so. Here we go. All right, so hopefully everyone got to see it in action. Any volunteers of what you asked it to do and what it was able to do? Yes, in the back here. Okay, ask it for a recipe for lemon squares. It's a good thing, and it delivered. It gave you a recipe. Did it look kind of like a recipe for lemon squares?
Yeah, it looked viable.
Okay, it looked viable, good. And to be clear what's going on when you ask it that, it's not like when you type something into Google and say, I need a lemon squares recipe, and then you get 50 recipes that are all called best lemon squares recipe. You've got to figure out which one actually is a good one. When you type that into ChatGPT, so the GPT means generative pre-trained transformer. And the key operating term here is generative. So what it's doing, it's not just Googling the information, it is making it up from scratch. So the thing you're looking at is not something you can find anywhere else on the internet. It is novel content. Whether it's a good recipe, to be determined, but it's a novel recipe. Maybe one other volunteer of what you had it do.
I asked it,
Oh yes, thank you.
I asked it to write a letter to my husband
Okay.
expressing my love for him.
Good. Anniversary coming up, or?
Fantastic. It's very lengthy. He's the steady anchor in the sea of life. I mean, yes.
It's good. It's really reaching, pulling those heartstrings. Great. Yeah, whenever I've had to try and do anything personal, it's like, it's kind of better than what I would have written. Like, I'm still going to do it myself, but this thing it came up with is pretty good. What I want to show you really quick, too, is the capacity that it has for image generation. So this is ChatGPT that you were all just playing around with. It's brought to you by a company called OpenAI. OpenAI also has another product called DALL-E, which is an image generating AI platform. So we can make this kind of evening appropriate, and we'll say a movie poster of a lecture on artificial intelligence to a group of students and faculty, and we will say, and some Catholics too?
A few Catholics.
And a few Catholics. All right, I've never typed this in before. I have no idea what it's going to come up with.
That should be fun. I am you. Oh,
Well, so you'll notice the language is nonsense, but kind of looks like what we asked it to make, right?
It looked like somebody who was supposed to be intelligent did messed up.
Yeah, it looks like there was some mess ups here, but it kind of looks movie poster-ish. The image is not quite as good as the text generation, but you still get the idea. I mean, it's pretty incredible. These images are all original, and by the way, if you use this, you have copyright on these because this is considered novel content. So I could go and publish these and say this is created by Joe Vukov, and that's my artwork, and that's literally when you sign up, it says, yep, we don't own this. You own the content. So that's what artificial intelligence looks like. Let me just get back into my slideshow. So what is it exactly? What I want to do for you now, and eventually we're going to be getting to the ethics of this, because I think it raises a whole host of issues that maybe, how many of you is this the first time you've seen this, either the images or the text? Okay, a few people. Yeah, so if it's the first time you've seen it, the first time I saw this, my mind just started reeling, right? It's like, this is just like unlike anything I've ever seen before. Before we get there, I want you to walk through how this works. So even if you've seen it before, you might kind of look at this and think, that looks like it may as well be magic. I typed the thing in and something came out. So I want to walk you through how this thing works, because I think understanding the mechanism of it is really helpful for thinking through the ethics of it. I should think, by the way, I'm an academic. I have to credit my sources. The slides here, I co-teach with a colleague who does a lot of AI work, and he helped me with these. So Dr. Michael Burns is a little citation down here. Thank you to Dr. Burns for the help with the slides. The best way to think about how an AI model is built, and this is LLM, is short for large language model. So that's what ChatGPT is. Not all AIs are LLMs, but anything dealing with text is considered an LLM, right? So it's a large language model. And the best way to think about how these work and how they're built is by analogy with a baby. So here is our untrained baby LLM. All a baby AI is able to do is basically take in some inputs and give out some outputs, kind of similar to a human baby. That's kind of all it can do. But it sort of has the capacity to learn, just like a human baby does. So what do you do with this? You first build one of these models that can't do much of anything. And just like we would do with a human baby, I have 3 kids at home, so this is like what we do, is you talk to it a lot, right? You expose it to lots of different words. You expose it to lots of different images. You try and teach it. You introduce it to different people. In this context, what you do is you expose it to a whole lot of human-generated text, because what you're going to want it to do is to write its own text. So to get it to do that, first you have to expose it to a whole lot of human-generated text. Where do you get that text? Well, we have this handy thing called the internet that has lots and lots of text. And in fact, that's what the folks at OpenAI and other builders of large language models do. They go to the internet and they just get as much text as they possibly can. And where do they get it from? We don't know, is the short answer. But we know that in previous generations of GPT, so GPT-2 they've released, so it's likely they're getting it from the same sources for ChatGPT that you just used. The one that you just used is called GPT-3. So it's the 3rd model of this kind of model. We know that with the 2nd version, the text they got came from a number of sources. First of all, they used literally all of Wikipedia. That's a lot of text. They uploaded millions of ebooks. Right? So any of you ever used a Kindle or an ebook, you can just grab all that, you throw all that up there, so it knows all of Shakespeare and Dickens and all that. You throw all that in there. They used a lot of Reddit. Any Reddit users out there? That's good high-quality content, right? That was a little sarcastic. There's also this nonprofit organization called Common Crawl. And what Common Crawl does is it takes a picture of the internet, as much as that's possible, every month, that you can then go to Common Crawl and pay for that data. So it's just publicly available, and anyone, costs some money, but you can say, I want a snapshot of the internet from 1999. I want a snapshot of the internet from September of 2019. And you can get that data. So they use that. So basically just giant snapshots of the entire internet. And that's what it was trained on. So once you've got all this text, you start feeding it into your model. And your model starts generating text that looks like human speech. And we're going to get to this in a second, but that's the goal of a large language model, is something that looks like human text. And initially, it works really bad. So you might ask it something like, how do I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And it says something like, Ariana Grande cookies, computers. Like that. Bad match. So the programmer is saying, no, that had nothing to do. Let's see if I got nothing to do with what I wanted to say. So you give it that feedback. Then you try again, and it says something like, you need 2 pieces of bread. Ah, good match. So you keep doing that. Again, it's a lot like teaching a kid how to talk. And you keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that, until it starts giving the sorts of outputs that you all were just getting, where you ask it a question, and it gives the heartfelt letter to your husband on your anniversary, right? So you say, ah, perfect match. That's what we wanted it to do. So that's how these things work. Is again, you basically expose them to giant amounts of data. You can think about, for the images, it's the same way. You just give a whole lot of pictures of things, and then that's how it kind of learns what an image looks like, and then you kind of keep telling it when it's doing what you want it to do and when it's not doing what you want it to do. So hopefully that kind of takes the curtain away a little bit, makes it a little less magical, right? It's not like totally magic what's going on. There's kind of have an idea of what the mechanism is. There's a number of challenges and limitations that come with this kind of artificial intelligence, and I want to walk you through 4 of them today. So this is an outline slide. I'll give you an idea of where we're heading. First of all, we're going to deal with this issue called alignment. Second, issues that come with how these things are trained. And third, how these things are used. This, by the way, is the thing most people talk about in higher ed context. Everyone's been wringing our hands about, what do we do with this, right? We've got this new tool that we can just generate text on the fly. Like, how does that make education look different? We're also going to look at this. I'm a philosopher, so I have to ask this question. This is a gentleman named Blake Lemoine. You can look him up. He was all over the headlines 2 years ago. He used to be a programmer at Google. As in everywhere, he was like on the Today Show and everything. And he started going public saying, I think Google is sentient. And Google axed him pretty rapidly. That was bad press for them. And then he did the Today Show circuit. So he didn't win a lot of adherence. I think most people don't think that the tool you were just interacting with was sentient. But I think it does raise some interesting questions, and he's a really smart guy. So we're going to talk a little bit about this question too, because I think it raises an interesting, like, at least raises this question of what is this thing? Like, what have we created? First of all, the issue of alignment. So I want to tell you a story about an AI that's a lot less complicated than ChatGPT. This is an AI that was built for an animal shelter in Alaska. And one thing that animal shelters in Alaska get, we don't have this problem in Chicago. I take it you don't have this problem in Baton Rouge. But that sometimes people would bring in an animal to the shelter that's not an animal, but is in fact a wolf. You don't want to adopt a wolf out to a nice family. So they decide, here's one thing we need to do. When we've got our volunteers from the local university helping us out on the weekends, we don't want to have to bring in the vet every time somebody brings in an animal that looks wolf-like. So we're going to make a model that we can just have our volunteer take a picture, and it will tell them wolf or husky. So that's what they did. They built this model, and it was working really well. So the way that you would build this is you have a whole bunch of pictures of huskies, a whole bunch of pictures of wolves, and then that's what it's trained on, and then you tell it when it's sorting them right. And it did really well until somebody took this picture of a husky and it misclassified it as a wolf. So it made a mistake. It's probably the right error to make. You don't want the wolves classified as huskies. This made the other mistake. And they went back and they were like, so why did the AI make this mistake? It had to do with how it was making the decisions that it was making and how it was sorting the material. Can anyone take a guess what it is about this picture that threw the algorithm off? The ears. I mean, that's what I would guess, right? The ears, the tooth shape. I'm not a veterinary scientist. The snout. Those are all very good, reasonable human guesses. An AI is not a reasonable human being. An AI is a machine. And what the machine had picked up on had nothing to do with the animal. It rather thought that it was a wolf because it was standing in the snow. All right, so they figured this out, right? And they figured out, okay, so this is a poorly trained AI, and it's sorting these pictures wrong. It's not looking at the animals at all. It's just looking whether this thing is standing in the snow. So this teaches us two lessons. First of all, and these lessons I think are important for understanding the ethics behind all this. First of all, an AI does what it was trained to do, nothing more, nothing less, and it often does it in ways that are not at all human looking. So that's the first lesson. This model was trained to sort huskies from wolves, and it did that really well until it got a false positive. But it was doing really well. It just was using a pattern of reasoning that looks nothing like what a human would do to sort two dogs, right? You don't look at the background. We can talk about this more. This is actually something really important if you're a student or a teacher thinking about the use of AI in your classroom. What ChatGPT was trained to do was to produce human-looking language. So when you have it write an essay for you, let's say hypothetically, it will write something that looks a lot like an essay. It does that really well. It was not trained to tell you true things, to tell you accurate things, to tell you creative things. None of that was trained to do. All it was trained to do was tell you something human looking. So when I actually teach my students this, they're like, well, yeah, of course you won't use this for schoolwork because it's not trained to get things right. It's not trained to get things right. It's trained to look human. I'm going to be talking about contexts where this is applied in healthcare context as well in just a second. I think it's also important to keep this alignment idea in mind, that AIs are trained to do and they do what they were trained to do. The second lesson that this husky wolf example teaches us is that if there's any biases or problems or misinformation in the training data, that shows up in your artificial intelligence. Now in this case, the bias was a pretty benign one. The bias was that huskies never go outdoors. Right? Because the assumption was all the pictures they were feeding into it of huskies were presumably cute animals cuddled up on their owners or on carpet, and all the wolves were outside. So that was the bias, and that's why the algorithm thought, oh, I know the best way to sort these. I'm going to say if it's outside, it's a wolf. If it's inside, it's a husky. But clearly, as soon as you pull that out, you're like, well, that's clearly bias, right? That has nothing to do with whether it's a husky or a wolf. It's a problem with training data. But because you were giving it biased information, it figured out a biased way to sort that information. So that brings me to my next point. It's the idea of training data bias. Look at what ChatGPT was trained on. This is the information that was used to construct the answers that you were asking it to give. Wikipedia, it turns out, is actually pretty accurate. It's variable. It depends who edited it last. How accurate are comment threads on YouTube and Reddit? Notice the number of users on the conspiracy theory Reddit thread alone. 2 million. That's all in there. This is not my hot take. Anyone who spent more than 10 minutes on the internet, I don't care what political party you are, what your orientation is, there's a lot of bad information and garbage on the internet. So you might ask, well, why wouldn't you filter that garbage out? Isn't that a reasonable thing to do? Right? Why wouldn't you just say oh, we're not going to use the conspiracy theory Reddit thread. We're going to flag all the comments that have racist stuff or problematic stuff in it, and we're going to not use that to train this thing. The problem is that there's a catch-22 here, and that if you take the time to filter out all the bad data, there's no way you can give it enough text that it becomes any good. These models become better as you give them more information on the front end. So, can you filter out all the garbage? Sure you could, but then it doesn't work. To get it to work, you need to put just as much data as you possibly can to the point that there's no human being that could sift through it all. So what does this mean? It means that artificial intelligence algorithms, if they work at all, and this applies in healthcare, this applies in image generation, this applies in text generation, if they're going to do good work, they are going to have biases and misinformation in them. That's just an inevitability of how these things, again, you could get rid of the bias and misinformation, and then they don't work anymore. So it's baked into the system that they have bias and misinformation. I'm going to skip that slide. I want to make sure we get to everything today. This is one of the most notorious examples of so the husky wolf example. You don't want to adopt a wolf, but it's kind of a silly example. We can see how there could be problem with misinformation. When you ask ChatGPT somebody, it just tells you false information. This happens, by the way. So don't ask ChatGPT something and just like trust that what it's saying is true. It's got all of Reddit in there. Like there's a lot of bad stuff in there too. So don't just trust it. Here's where it gets even more serious. This is an AI algorithm that, by the way, is currently in use. They've rebranded. It's not called North Point Suite anymore, but it's currently in use. It's an algorithm that the criminal justice system has taken up to try and decide the likelihood of somebody who goes on parole is going to reoffend. And here's what they found with this algorithm. So you can take a look at the data here really quick. Basically what happened is the algorithm underestimated the rate at which white parolees would reoffend and overestimated the degree to which black parolees would reoffend. So it just got it wrong. Why? Because the data that they used to train it on had baked in biases that then showed up in the decisions it was making. And what should scare you a little bit, this is like absolutely still, I forget, there's still like 10 or 12 states that use this as their official way of determining parole. So this is not like hypothetical, this could go wrong. This is something that absolutely is currently happening right now that is as a result of this training data bias that we're talking about, right? It's that you've got lots of bad data going in that in turn has very real world effects. We haven't talked much about healthcare yet. We're going to be doing that more. There's all sorts of areas. This is a great review article I can direct you to. It's a couple years old now, but it still is roughly covering all the areas in healthcare that AI is being applied to. And let's just put it this way, it's across the board. So AI is currently being deployed in radiology. Turns out that a good algorithm can actually make differential diagnoses at a rate that's better than radiologists. Not across the board, but for certain differential diagnoses, the AI is better at it. It's being used to triage patients. It's being used sort of as like a Fitbit, right? Personal health records. It's being used to write doctor's notes, all sorts of stuff that it's being used on in healthcare. So when you add in the potential for AI bias and misinformation, you can see the potential for having real world effects being really through the roof. We haven't talked about use yet. This is what often gets talked about when you're talking about AI. This was one of the early headlines. New York City public schools banned it across the board, which anyone who knows the internet knows it's just not going to work because there's a million Starbucks and like cell phone data. So it seems like that was not it's maybe a nice gesture, but it's probably not going to work. My own university, Loyola, took a little bit more soft approach. This got distributed to us right before this academic year, and basically said, you should know this is a thing and should think about how you and your students approach it. So it's not banned at Loyola, but we were warned about it. Here's the problem with this, is that in answer to this question, this is a recent paper, just a couple months ago, can AI-generated text be reliably detected? It's an easy answer, and it's no. So the best evidence for this is that OpenAI, so the company that brings you ChatGPT, tried to develop a program that would detect its own outputs. So as in they're like, we see this as a problem. We see that potential for plagiarism and misuse is a problem. We want to build a tool that is literally the thing that's going to detect if our tool made it. And they took it offline because they were like, it doesn't work. We can't tell. The problem is that there's not that it's totally striking out, but there's too many false positives, as in it says this was AI generated when it's not, and too many false negatives where it was AI generated and it doesn't catch it. It's basically no good for any context where it matters. So for instance, as a professor, if I was to use one of these and say, you fail because it says it was AI generated, there's enough percentage chance that it was just getting it wrong. That's pretty high stakes, right? So you like wouldn't want to use it. This is a strange image, but there's a reason for it. So in education contexts, we're always talking, this is a teaser trailer, I'm going to get to this in a second. I realize this is a bizarre image.
I got to.
Yeah, In education context, we always think first about education. But I actually think it's just, and not to say it's not a problem. So thinking about plagiarism, thinking about how students and professors are using this, it is a problem, right? And something we need to think about, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So what I want to play for you now that I think gets to this, and maybe hopefully a humorous way, this is a voice AI. So this is not a text AI. This is an AI that was trained on the voice specifically of David Attenborough. And if you've never heard David Attenborough, you've heard David Attenborough. He's literally the nature documentary guy that's narrated every nature documentary you've ever seen. Yeah. So there's tons of voice data out there. And what they did is they trained a model on David Attenborough, like all of his documentaries. And you'll see here that, I'm just going to play you a clip. It's kind of quiet, but if we're all quiet, we should be able to hear it. It's David Attenborough narrating the dining preferences of people who eat at Taco Bell in the manner of a nature documentary.
Welcome to the world of Taco Bell, where the flavors of Mexico meet the ingenuity of American fast food. Today we will witness a fascinating phenomenon, the ordering of Taco Bell. Observe how the menu items are arranged in various categories, each with its own unique characteristics. There are the crunchy tacos, soft tacos, burritos, and more.
All right, you get the idea. What's important is David Attenborough never said any of those things, right? That is not David Attenborough talking. That is an AI that is sounding just like David Attenborough. So that's funny, I hope. Right? This is speaker tricks. Inject some humor every once in a while. Think about, though, when this technology gets used, for instance, in the next election cycle. You hear an audio clip of the candidate you don't like, the candidate you do like. You're going to have no clue if that's actually something the candidate said, right? And as video AI gets better, even if you're watching the video, you have no idea if that's something that candidate A said or candidate B said. So this is actually, I think, when we broaden out this issue of misuse of AI, let's see. Okay, Dave, we got to move on. I think there's this issue of use of AI and misuse of AI that it's probably the biggest concern to me as an ethicist. Not just the use and misuse of it, but the way in which this is going to slowly erode trust in our communities, right? So here's my little icons of professor and their teachers. And already you kind of see this, right? It's like the professors are like, is this like, this essay seemed kind of AI-ish, like did an AI write this? And the students are like, I've got to my professors don't trust me now. But you think about another context, in healthcare context, right? Is my doctor really writing my notes? Like, did I get assigned this test by a doctor? Or is this like just an AI saying I need this? Think about the relationship between corporations and their clients. Think about our already polarized society. My worry is that as AI becomes more and more prevalent, we have these divisions and erosion of trust. They're already present in society, but as there's this barrier where we're like, am I even listening to my political candidate? Where did this come from? Is somebody just making this in their basement? This is like one of the big problems that I see coming down the pipeline for us in AI use. I just really want to talk quickly about AI consciousness because I want to make sure to save a little time for Q&A. I'll just say this. According to many reductive theories of mind, what the human mind is a meat computer. It's kind of a crass way of putting it maybe, but according to many, and this is not a view of mind that I hold, but according to many views of mind, what the human mind does is it takes inputs and gives out outputs. And if that's your view of what the human person is, I would suggest to you that this question of what's the difference is actually a really good question. It's like, well, this AI stuff kind of behaves like a human, kind of talks like a human, kind of creates like a human. What is it that makes it not a human? So here's the problems we've looked at. Really quick, in the last 5-10 minutes, what I want to do is go through a response to some of these. And here with 10 minutes left, I'm finally going to get to my thesis, which is this: that we can avoid many of these problems of artificial intelligence by humanizing it. That is, by developing our sense of what the human being is and why the human being matters. This is actually a really timely subject. This is an apostolic exhortation that, check this out, I added this slide on the plane ride here today. It just came out today. And Pope Francis talks about just this. So this is from an exhortation, literally came out hours ago. Pope Francis says, artificial intelligence and the latest technological innovations start with the notion of a human being with no limits, whose abilities and possibilities can be infinitely expanded thanks to technology. In this way, the technocratic paradigm monstrously feeds upon itself. What I want to suggest to you over the next 5 or 10 minutes as we wrap things up today is that Pope Francis, I think, is absolutely on track here. I would encourage you all go read it. It's only 72 paragraphs. It's a quick read. And it deals mostly with climate change, but a little bit on AI and some other stuff too. It's an interesting document. What I want to suggest to you is that this idea of a more robust understanding of who we are as people is going to be the answer to a lot of these questions. So I want to walk through really quickly why this is the case. So I've already mentioned to you that if this is your idea of what the human is what we are as a meat computer, then AI is going to look really human. Bless you. But we're not just that. The Catholic intellectual tradition puts it this way. This is from the Catechism. The human person created in the image of God is a being at once corporeal or bodily and spiritual. Man, though made of body and soul, is a unity. And it's not just Catholics who think that humans are embodied. I want you to think about, do we have any athletes in the room or former athletes? Okay, a few nodding. Musicians, anyone play guitar or, okay, a few. Any dancers? Okay, a few dancers, okay. So if you're a dancer, if you're a musician, if you're an athlete, you know that when you're engaged in those activities, it's not that you're thinking with your mind and then like telling your body to do something. And I know this because I can't dance, and that's what I try to do. Say, okay, Joe, you move this foot, then now you should like move your hands, and it's like, it's a horrible, I hope none of you are at a wedding where I'm in attendance, because it's not a good sight. If you try to think with your head first and then move your body, things fall apart. So it's because of reasons like that that a lot of philosophers have found themselves aligning with the Catholic intellectual tradition and saying, no, we're not just computers. We're embodied, and we actually think with our bodies. When I run an arpeggio on the guitar, I'm thinking with my fingers. When I dance, I'm being creative with my body. When I'm an athlete, I'm engaging in my world with my body. And I think as soon as you have that vision of human beings, again, whether you're taking this from the Catholic intellectual tradition or you're just taking it from our everyday experiences, I think this question that Mr. Lemoyne asked, which I think is a good one, but I think that question goes away. That's not what the human mind is. We aren't just meat computers. We're something much more than that. I think once you see that, this parallel with, is artificial intelligence really intelligent? From my perspective, I want to say it doesn't have a body. It can't be in the world in the way you and I are in the world. It can't act our intelligence out in the world, so it can't be. Here's the second way in which I think a robust view of humanity can mitigate against the problems of artificial intelligence. When we're thinking about alignment and we're thinking about training, we need to think more about a human vision of what we're aiming to do with it and have a human vision of how we're training it. And here's an example I wanted to throw out for you. One area where it's getting a lot of attention right now is the use of AI and robotics in elder care. We kind of, as a society, are facing a perfect storm right now where we have an aging population. We have a lack of healthcare workers. There's not enough healthcare workers. And we have robotics and AI rising really quickly. So a lot of people have been talking about, is there a solution somewhere in here? Now, if you have a well-formed conscience, you should probably be thinking right now, I don't want grandma, I don't want mom, I don't want myself being taken care of by R2-D2 for the rest of my life. That's pretty clearly horrible. I would say almost everyone would think that's a dystopian outlook. But what I wanted to suggest to you is that we might be able to take a humanizing perspective on this. What if we try to think about the development of AI and robotics in a way that we think, what are humanizing tasks and dehumanizing tasks? What can support the humanity and the well-being of patients, of healthcare providers? What can uphold human dignity among patients and healthcare providers? And think through that. And I think if we think through those questions, from my perspective at least, I'd be happy to talk about this more, but a lot of ethicists are sort of, and Catholic ethicists specifically, are landing on, well, yeah, we don't want R2-D2 caring for our relatives or for ourselves, but maybe there's a place for artificial intelligence and things like, behind the scenes work or sort of certain daily jobs that need to be done while we're caring for elders. And in a way that allows our providers to actually provide the more human tasks and people to be more cared for in human ways. So like the actual care provision is actual providing of care and not just day-to-day tasks that maybe technology could help us with. Am I totally endorsing this? Not necessarily. I'm just suggesting that when we have these like very in-our-face questions about like, how should this technology be used, the more that we emphasize our humanity and our shared humanity, the more that we may be able to come up with perspectives that aren't all or nothing. This is a document that just came out from the Santa Clara, I'm gonna butcher it, it's the Markula Institute of Ethics at Santa Clara University. It was actually done in conjunction with the Vatican. Looking at this question is how, when we look outside of healthcare context, can we align and train artificial intelligences in a way that promotes humanity and in a way that are aligned with human values and human dignity rather than just profit? And maybe I'm being a little cynical. I think we're at a precipice right now. I think the big flashy AI might be at this point already almost a lost cause. It's really expensive to run. It's really expensive to operate. It's likely that that's going to be profit aligned. But I still have a lot of optimism and hope for smaller scale applications of artificial intelligence. When we're using artificial intelligence to do patient intake, compose doctor notes, read scans, education contexts, I think that there still is hope to think about, how can we build these tools in a way that supports human dignity rather than undermines it? All right, so maybe this is optimistic, but this is my suggestion for a way of starting to address the alignment and training problems, is how can we really put humanity first? This leaves this question of use and misuse. How can we trust each other in an age of AI, right? And this is the one that keeps me up at night, because I think it is hard. I want to close with a suggestion. It comes from John Paul II. John Paul II has this idea of personalism. Here's a quote from one of his texts. "The person is the kind of good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love." It's coming right out of the Catholic tradition. It's something that a lot of us can get behind. It's seeing each other as people with dignity, and as people that we can live with. And I don't have the total solution here, but this issue of trust, I think the only way to combat it is to start seeing each other as people. And to work on that, it might be difficult at large scale, but I think in the small scale, it might be something that we can strive for. I'm going through a couple of these. Here's my cheesy slide. Got to close with optimism, right? My idea is that take something like the education context. In some ways, the cat is already out of the bag. AI's here. How are we going to rebuild trust between students and teachers? Something I've really been trying to do is to try and cultivate a sense of trust with my students, saying, I see you as a person, you see me as a person, let's get to know each other. Let's build this relationship of mutual respect and understanding and seeing each other as dignified humans. And that's my approach in education. And what I want to suggest is that this idea of personalism, seeing each other as people, is maybe a way to mitigate against the distrust that's inevitable when we apply AI to healthcare, when we apply it to politics, when we apply it to corporations, is building up trust. Is that naive? Maybe. But again, I think the cat's out of the bag. I think there aren't any easy fixes. And I think this is a fix that maybe is grounded in the Catholic intellectual tradition. And it's one that, even if on the larger scale, might be difficult. You know, how do we build trust in all of society in an era of AI? Maybe that's difficult. But we all have our local communities, whether it's the classroom, whether it's patients, whether it's local parishes. And that's really our biggest sphere of influence to begin with. I think it's building up trust in those that is going to be probably our best way to mitigate the distrust that could come about as a result of AI. This is an image that was generated by AI. I think it's kind of pretty. And I think it points us towards this optimistic future that if we use AI with humans in mind, and if we put humans first, and if we think about treating each other with respect and seeing each other with equal dignity, then maybe we can not be afraid of AI, and we can even use it to create something beautiful. Thank you very much.